Hi everyone, I'm Airier, and today Star Wars or Warhammer 40K, episode 24, Beyond Axum. Now last time around, Anakin got promoted to the commander of the Star Wars side, not the Imperium yet. I am catching myself on that one. It's the first time, and I never made any previous mistakes when I was saying, and then had to cut them out. That never happened. Also, Ciaphas Cain is involved. So already, I don't really care what happens beyond it, because things are happening and Ciaphas Cain is involved. Two things that I think are really damn cool. That said, Dooku's on the thumbnail. We haven't got to him yet. So I'm assuming in the next 20 minutes, we're probably going to get to him. And I'm really hoping we are, because I don't know what's going on with the Separatist side right now. And I'm very curious to see, are they just reacting? Are they out of the fray because everyone's focusing on the Star Wars side? Or are they the ones dealing with the massive bulk of every other Space Marine except for the small force left on Axum that the entirety of the Jedi war machine, I guess, yeah, actually, by this point, that's probably an accurate way to describe it, is grinding their teeth against and losing? I don't know. But if we have any information about what Palpatine is ordering Dooku to do, I am in for this, because that sounds really, really cool and revealing, and I just want to see how this is twisting things around. And if we happen to get a moment where maybe someone like Dooku or Palpatine is like, what the fuck is going on? I did not plan for this. I will laugh my ass off. Otherwise, you guys know the deal. Link below video. Hit it up. And let's get started. Ooh.
Davik Thune had ensured that there were at least two.
Oh. So it's Separatist adjacent, maybe not Dooku, but he's in the thumbnail. So maybe in this part is the second half of this, because fan usually goes in half by half. So we'll get Davik Thune's side, because he's doing all of the direct droid killing mayhem, and basically he's just indulging himself with this side, if it's anything like the last time he was on the screen. And the other side will probably be Dooku reacting, and I can't. Oh, yeah.
Strike cruisers cutting across the skies of Raxus Secundus, even before the battle within the void had become a foregone affair.
So they already won.
Amid an oncoming ocean of particulate death and strobing light-based lethality, the world below them had elected to activate a series of powerful, overlapping shield generators.
Okay, this is actually something I'm really curious about, because it hasn't really come up where shield generators outside of individual ship level has been mentioned, because everything the Imperium is throwing just kind of like, what shield generators? Planet-sized ones, though, do exist in Warhammer 40K, and they're nothing to scoff at. They are very impressive. And one of the ways that specifically Chaos got over it was dropping a Blackstone fortress into it, and then destroying the subsequent entire planet. That's not something you can repeat very often. Now, I don't think the Star Wars side will measure up to that level of overpowered, but I want to see just how well they do. It's one of the things I've actually been really curious about.
Yet they had failed to act before the Chapter Master, having been entirely unprepared for the sudden assault. The Imperial fleet had begun bombardment of the world, only to find their blows energetically blunted by the infrastructure below them. Before any major corrective actions could be taken, a second Separatist fleet had arrived to relieve the assault of the planet. The void battle had...
Oh, so one, planetary shields were strong enough. Two, they only blunted it because they got there so fast. And it almost sounds like Davik Thune was underneath the shield before they got there, but that could just be me misreading it. Mishearing, more likely at this point.
Had been rejoined, but while it was fought, and Davik threw his might against the aforementioned General Grievous, the strike cruisers had deployed their tactical teams across the world, barely managing to stay ahead of the fields of defensive fire that the planet threw up towards the trapped cruisers.
Wait, trapped cruisers? Oh, so they're shooting from underneath the shield, it seems? Oh. Interesting.
It was, however,
or are they shooting the ones
very
underneath
conditions
it?
that lent the deployed Space Marines their vital sense of urgency. Landing amid artistically crafted cities, plains of burning gold, and polar ice caps shrouded in haloed auroras. The only binding similarity between their locations was their objectives.
And I just realized this is probably the first time this has happened to anyone on the Imperium side while they're here. It's a Space Marine feeling urgency. That has not happened. Even in the times where they got beaten, the one fight with Anakin that was an absolute slugfest for Anakin more than anything else, and he got lucky. Even when that happened, their urgency didn't seem to be there. It was more like a foregone conclusion, and here's fun. Because partially they've never really been pushed. So even just in this amount, that's actually the first time. So I guess point for the Separatists.
Targets.
Nice change
The
of pace.
massive and vital planetary shield generators.
Yeah.
The deployed tactical and assault squads were swift and lethal, calling down reinforcements when they earned significant footholds and swiftly building up force on several combat theaters.
Oh.
They sought, one and all, to break into the defensive installations which surrounded each of their tactical objectives. In minutes, each and every one of the shield generators were under assault, and tens of minutes later, they would begin to fall.
So the shield generators were good, but they didn't have them on in advance, which is something some Imperial worlds do where the generator is just on regardless, and you have very controlled checkpoints. That's actually pretty smart. Except for the worlds that were controlled by the Empire, but that came later, and that was specifically the planet where they were building the Death Star stuff. So, yeah, that's probably not the best example.
One by one. Brother Arachnus stood guard around a smoldering corner within a massive room. Beside him was the huge, energetically pulsating generator, humming and filling the air with a static charge that caused a slight fuzzing in his helmet's auspex.
Whoa.
But not enough of one to prevent him from noticing the approaching droids. He hefted his mighty bolter and looked down the sights.
What kind of droids?
Though the room was very large, with an extremely high ceiling, most of that space was taken up by the shield-emitting machinery it was meant to house, forcing the remaining interior space into cramped walkways, gangways, and elevated graded balconies and their adjoining ramps.
Oh?
This, in turn, forced the droids to march in columns, their weaker, thinner units moving forward as faltering shields with their more advanced units behind.
Okay. One, I did not realize I could put down auto advance like that. Two, so they're in a location where they're actually taking advantage of the terrain. Oh, part of me is kind of surprised that the droids would do that. On the other hand, the part of me is going, no, wait. Droid planning was intentionally need-capped so they wouldn't actually be overwhelmingly powerful. So it makes sense that they're fucking that up and fighting in the absolute worst position possible. Because when you don't care about the numbers, quality and quantity don't really matter. I'm sure that won't backfire.
The tactic seemed sound, but it was all but ignored in the face of penetrating bolter fire. B-1 battle droids, B-2 battle droids, and even destroyers found themselves all but helpless in the face of the Astartes' chosen weapon.
Basically just rocket-propelled
the
shots.
shielded destroyer
Sometimes.
droids needed to be shot at before they unrolled and opened their shields.
Yes.
But doing so was a trivial game for the Space Marine, and one which he had mastered in little time. This time, however, the tactic was different. The destroyers advanced from the front, already deployed and crawling along at their snail's pace, while behind them, the skinny, skeletal-like B-1s marched in rank. And behind them, the similar but endlessly more problematic black skeletons of the commando droids, each one bearing a thick, humming vibro sword, marched as well.
They're using tactics. Like, it's still very basic marching tactics, but they're actually using tactics. Usually that's not the case. I've been told that Grievous is weird in this one, where there's some kind of explanation for why the initial Clone Wars cartoon, like the 5-minute interval one that was put up on Toonami and Cartoon Network over the course of a couple, I think, weeks even, was Grievous at the most brutal and honestly kind of terrifying, versus the Clone Wars TV show where it's like, hey, no, you don't need to worry about this. This is a villain of the week and he will lose. You don't even need to figure out how. It's just getting there's the fun part. Maybe that will have something to do with this?
That's a blasted puzzle.
The Space Marine said to himself,
Mines?
Can't shoot through them. Toss a grenade and the black ones will toss it back. And if I close for melee, the white ones will scrap themselves, buying chances for the black ones to skew. Whoa!
He exclaimed.
So that's the strategy. It's literally protecting the droids at the back who actually have a chance to do damage, where the first one is a really strong shield with actual shields, and then it's literally cannon fodder and meat shields, or I guess metal shields in the middle. Huh. So to delay shots and to delay physical bodies after that. Yeah, these are usually much better tactics than I expected.
Aimed as
There's
the
definitely some
V1s
control going
suddenly
on.
drew grenades from around their waists and reeled back their arms, pitching them over the shields. Arachnus
Smart
opened
move.
fire, catching most of the spheres in the air
Shooting
over the
grenades out of the air,
destroyers,
man.
though the blasts failed to reach them through their shields. He caught one of the grenades that had been tossed over, pitching it back and kicking the other two that landed nearby to the same effect, bouncing the deadly explosives off the walls and grates to veer back towards the droids.
Yep.
But they all detonated too soon to catch them.
I'm sorry, this is an entire thing that I absolutely love looking at. We've been doing so much human level fighting that moving to a truly superhuman level to see a Space Marine fighting and one that's been around, this is really cool. Because just the little things like shooting grenades out of the air, assessing the entire composition of the enemy, knowing that things are a little different now, is like, got to do this. And then just neutralizing all the grenades by kicking and throwing and shooting them. It's a lot of detail that you could never get in a normal combat. And Fan doesn't try and write that kind of detail in a combat. He does sweeping expanses to show what's going on with individual people until you're in their perspective. He gives more and more detail for people who have more and more time to think in a fight. And I like that perspective. And right here, it's really cool because you can see that he has more time to think about. He has more time to react. He has more actions, essentially, to drop into D&D parlance. And this is the description that, or the visible showing of that happening, saying he's not just superior, we're showing him do more. Where when we were in different people's perspective, such as the not Mandalorians fighting on Axum, I know I thought they were Mandalorians in front because they had the Ripper gun, that's on me. When we saw the kid shooting, it was a lot of focus on what other people were doing, but not on them and what his actions were. It was like, here's what I did, here's what happened. And now we're seeing, here's all the things I'm doing, and here's the reaction after that. Oh man, it's a cool way to show someone is more competent by just having them do more in what feels like roughly the same bit of time.
Destroyers opened fire while he was distracted, and the Marine was shoved back behind his corner by the sudden heated impact of one of their larger particle bolts.
Ooh, custom art.
He checked his smoldering armor, finding 2 impact sites on the left side of his chest, both bleached of their paint and puckered, but intact. He grinned, actually feeling a bit of earned adrenaline flood his system as he peeked back at their advancing lines. The white skeletons were drawing out more grenades even as he watched.
Yep.
This time, he took the initiative, charging out before they had time to reel back their arms for another toss. He fired a few shots to cover himself, the destroyers returning fire almost right away, but failing to connect with him as he ran and reached the wall across from where he had started, jogging forward on powered mechanical muscles. He hit the wall, but did not stop, his thick ceramite boots stomping dents into the vertical metal surface as he charged up its side, gaining altitude rapidly before reaching up with his left hand and grasping the lip of one of the lower hanging metal balconies. As he did, he allowed his right arm to aim downward, holding his thick bolter one-handed as he hung above them, unloading the full magazine into the droids below him.
Okay, I gotta remember, if I actually hold down the button, it does speed up while listening to it. That's weird. Also, I love how all of this in game terms is something that happens. They took their turn, and he took his to move and then go up and then shoot from it. I'm sorry, just because I'm relating this to game terms, and I know that's not what a fan's doing, but the fact that it actually works that way is so freaking funny to me. Because in the game, every Marine has like the forward, backward, like or horizontal movement, but then they can go up 3 inches or however much movement they have. Various things apply, and for all I know, maybe the edition changed that. But previously in 8th and 9th, at least, that's how it worked, and some others. So just seeing like, hey, here's the vertical movement they're supposed to be able to do, it just makes sense that they're doing it through sheer fuck you, I'm strong reasoning. And I just like seeing that because it's not something that a lot of people would write out. They'd write them storming the ship, which admittedly, Fan has done. But we didn't see how. And now we're actually seeing one Space Marine fight an actual opponent. Just, yeah, movement. It's a thing.
Maligned machines hesitated and even seemed to panic, half simply dropping their grenades to the ground as they attempted to fire up at him, while the other half stupidly activated and tossed the explosives, making themselves prime targets for his bolts. Most of the white skeletons and half of the black were
And
eradicated
there's the
right
droid's
away,
stupidity
either caught
again.
in sprays of bolter fire or in the sudden blasts born from their own intercepted grenades.
Yep.
Once more, the destroyers proved resilient, though they had a lot of trouble managing their aim directly upwards.
Oh.
Ammo expended, Arachnus cursed and tossed away his blessed bolter and released the foot of the metal balcony, dropping down
Tossed
on top
away.
of both of the destroyers beneath.
I'm assuming he's planning to grab it later, but throwing away a blessed weapon? And I thought that, I'm just going to say Team Red is the one that were much more religiously inclined. So that is actually weird for that description to happen. It'd be like tossing away a holy relic, which is kind of how anything blessed is considered here. That's actually very showing about him being much more pragmatic than religious.
Beneath him as he whipped out his combat knife in a single fluid motion. His boots hit the energy fields with solid thumps and screeches of reactive radiation, but after their force was stolen away, his feet began to sink through the fields almost instantly, the destroyers struggling to orient and fire accurately with the long
that's so
noses of their
cool.
rifles once his body
They're just
began
too
slipping
heavy.
past their
Like,
shields.
physically too
He
massive.
crushed both of the destroyers under either boot, hacking their heads off with his knife before they fell away. Backtracking rapidly out of the aftermath and only narrowly managing to avoid the energetic strikes of the remaining.
I gotta remember not to do the forward thing. I keep getting myself on that. Must be a new feature. Also, I love all of this, that it went from the 2 turns, the movement, the shooting, and now he's calling into melee and essentially got a good melee hit in on something with a 5+ invul save. I know it's not what fans are writing, but it actually works in game terms, and it's just fun to watch, man.
4 commandos. Arachnus hopped onto his toes and began to bob and weave his massive form, making himself unpredictable, flipping his knife into a reverse grip as the 4 agile abominations spread out and drove in, aiming to cut him down from several different angles. The symmetry of their machine minds was perfect.
And
Too
predictable.
perfect. For a mortal man, such calculations would have been superior. Yet, for an Astartes, such things, while still blindingly fast, were predictable. When he observed the even spacing between all 4 vectors, their synchronized striking patterns, and their use of ordered, almost predetermined executions, Arachnus realized these combat AI were far from the most lethal he had ever contended with.
Oh.
Which was good, because
That is a very important sentence. Combat AI, or just AI in general in 40K, that he's fought against before. Okay. For anyone who doesn't know, AI is banned in 40K. At this point, if you're still watching this, I'm assuming you kind of know that. But them already having experience about it, anyone having experience with AI is surprising. Now, if he's talking about Necrons, which are AI, but they're more AI adjacent because they were living people and they haven't created more based on that. It's all just straightforward, uplifted people at that point. And a lot of them then downgraded and unlifted to the point where they're functionally, essentially lobotomized, but they're more or less just all metal servitors in a lot of cases. But just flat out AIs and very good ones he's fought, that is weird because I don't know very many factions outside of the Space Dwarves, the Leagues of Votann, that actually have AI. Technically the Tau, but maybe this is a guy who fought the Tau before? I don't know. Either that or Fan is creating a previous faction they fought against that did use AI, which in its own right would be kind of impressive that they could not be deaded long enough for the chapter to even fight them at this point in the 40K storyline.
Because they outnumbered him by a large margin. Once more, he took the initiative, running in towards their center and diving down into a boot-first slide. The 2 who had attempted to flank him found themselves scraping unwillingly past their target, servos screeching as they attempted to redirect their momentum to catch him. The 2 near the center drove their swords down, seeking to impale the Marine as he slid low between them. His blade-bearing hand deflected one strike, while the other, free hand, slapped the flat of one of the blades, knocking it aside and taking the offending droid by the wrist. It all happened in mere milliseconds, and then he was past, dragging one of the black skeletons after him as he rolled upright, crushing and smashing it against his knees and body as he did, letting it drop once he had risen and stomping over its face and chest.
Okay, for as much as Davik Thune's fight against droids was him just showing off and having fun taking them all out with a single swipe, this one feels like there are much more threats. So it's a really cool way to show that here is the difference between well, I was going to say Grandmaster, but that's not the correct term. Someone who's in charge of the chapter master, that's the phrase, versus someone who's really competent and really experienced, but not a chapter master level of power. Because generally, if you're surviving long enough to do that, you have a lot of experience and power. So it's really cool to say he's still taking this on easy mode, but he has to be a lot more brutal to take down what he can get when he gets them. Where when we saw the previous fight, it's like, okay, here's a difference level. Now, it's unique here because Fan usually does this the other way. Normally, he gives us a small example and then builds and builds and builds so we can establish the power level. And we still haven't got to flat out swarms of Astartes falling in yet. We've had it alluded to, but never on screen directly. A handful of Marines here and there is the most that's happened. Actually, earlier in this video with the actual followers of Vulcan, which I don't know why, but for some reason I thought I forgot the salamander's name for a second there. That's weird. Here, though, we're getting that level of this is what Astartes will fight like at a normal level, as opposed to the oh shit level. I mean, it's still a named character, but close enough. It's really cool to see that he's still having an easy time, but he has to actually fight as opposed to have fun with it.
Remaining three had not paused to mourn their fourth, however, and now they all drove in from the center, each covering the other. Arachnus reached down with a numb, free hand, fumbling for a smoke grenade as he retreated back. The delay in his reaction almost cost him dearly as the droids forced him to hasten his retreat, cutting shallow slices out of his armor as they sought his vitals. Their vibroblades turning the ceramite they touched to fine powder.
Oh,
the adamantium blade of his knife held back their most lethal strikes, however, and after a brief round of parrying and counter-strikes, he leapt back once more, throwing a smoke grenade into their faces. The grenade...
I wish there was someone who did a quick animation of that fight scene, because I would love to see a Space Marine with a knife versus a bunch of vibroblades, where the vibroblades aren't just immediately outclassed, because that is so cool. The idea of like having it swing in, gouge off part of the shoulder pauldron, and then get blocked by the sword as he dips around, or I guess the knife. And granted, for an Astartes, a knife would be a sword to anyone else. Oh, dude. Just moments like this where I wish there was a budget to animate this. There's a lot of people making cool art, and Fan does find good evocative images, but just a fan animation of the fan's work. Oh, dude, that would be so on par.
Of course, produced much more than smoke, emitting 32 kinds of sensory impairment countermeasures.
Oh,
the cloud of smoke both shimmering brightly at first before becoming opaque as night. The droids floundered, blind and deaf in the sudden mire, but Brother Arachnus, just as deaf and just as blind, did not. His photo-perfect memory held the exact instant before his grenades had detonated crisp and clear in his mind, and he let it, his speed, and his predictions guide him. And they guided him true. Steel spilled steel in the screeching union of death meeting false life. And when the cloud of billowing, storm-like smoke cleared, Arachnus stood over the butchered corpses of the three remaining commando droids. He looked up, locating his bolter, and taking it up again, checking it for damage, and then reloading the sturdy implement of doom.
Dude. And yeah, he picked up the bolter again. Still, I am going to come back to the point that he was willing to throw it away in the moment. For the Skywatch, I wouldn't be too surprised because they're much less dogmatic about that aspect. Although I'm coming to the belief that they are dogmatic about different things, considering they may or may not be offshoots of a certain one eye, but
Staring back down the way the droids had come, he could see no more approach.
Also, I realized I just called them the Skywatch. I apologize. I meant Team Blue.
Yet, when he turned to take up his position again, he found something else standing there by the corner. A man. An old man. He stood regally with an air of imperious authority that
I was not expecting Dooku to drop in this fast. I was expecting Grievous because he's kind of the lead up, but maybe that's partially why people have been telling me that Grievous is a lot different in this one.
Arachnus had seen on many Inquisitors and Lord Generals alike. Though
Dooku
this person, whoever he was, could be neither. He wore the stylish but comparatively plain clothing of this planet's nobility, and he bore no obvious cybernetics or signs of rejuvenation, despite the fact that his hair was nearly as white as his sickly old skin. For all the signs of his advanced age, however, Arachnus could see no weakness within the man, and the red, glowing blade of light which the man held out to his side was all the sign the Space Marine needed to know that this man was a hostile force.
Yep.
For a brief moment, both locked eyes through Arachnus' helmet lenses, neither moving, and then, in a sudden burst signaled by nothing more than instinct, both warriors reeled up in action and extended their lethal powers towards the other. Arachnus pivoted on his heel, bringing his bolter to bear and unloading his freshly replaced magazine. Self-propelled bolts screamed through the air like miniature meteors, bursting and exploding violently as they made
Okay, this is kind of a weird thing to point out, but calling them miniature meteors is not entirely accurate because a lot of meteors are probably roughly about the size of a bolter, so just like a meteor actually is more accurate. Now, when you get something larger, we usually call those asteroids, but that's the difference between something small and something large, and an asteroid would usually burn up versus a meteor, which is actually hitting the ground, so that's actually the differentiation there, but a lot of people don't actually know that divide. They think a meteor is smaller than an asteroid, so most people use it that way, and because English is based on using something incorrectly wrong enough until it becomes accurate, eventually that will probably become how the phrase actually works. But yeah, in general, meteors can actually be really tiny. They're pretty common to find that way, actually. There's tons of stories and videos of you can see tiny, or where you can see tiny ones hitting the ground or impacting things, and they do a lot of damage. And it's usually just the smallest metal bit, but they're actually very small to the point where a bolter is, in many cases, bigger than meteors or meteorites when they're still falling. So, yeah, just a weird thing there.
Contact with the stream of warp lightning that poured out from the fingers of the old man's free hand. Arachnus cursed his bad luck. Another witch. The surge of corrupting power traveled up the rain of
Wait. Not that I disagree with anything he said, but I was assuming that they would have the information passed on to them that glowy red sword meant they were going to be the equivalent of a witch to them because it meant Jedi or Sith. Now, the Sith part, I'm not sure if they know about a lot yet. They may or may not, for all I know. But I was under the impression that they were talking between the two chapters. It might not have filtered down to Arachnus' level yet. Also, because I haven't said earlier, every time I hear Arachnus, I keep thinking the spice must flow. Yeah, completely wrong. No relation. But it's in my head and it keeps happening.
Exploding bolts like a nest of hungering snakes, entering the barrel of the gun and forcing Arachnus to toss away his weapon just as it exploded.
Oh!
The fragments of his beloved bolter showered him in a hateful rain of burning metal as he drew out his combat knife again.
That is actually kind of terrifying. That psychic... Wow. Force, there we go. Force lightning could instantly disarm entire swathes of Space Marines by igniting their own bolters. And if there's like something heavier, like a heavy bolter pack, or some of the crazy things that have come out later that they might have access to, destroying weapons through Force lightning that makes Sith a much more immediate threat than most Force users. Technically, I know there is a light side version of Force lightning, but from what I heard, it's very, very unique, and I don't think anyone that I know about in this time frame used it.
But he barely had time to intercept the red blade of his enemy's weapon as it came upon him, stabbing towards one of his two hearts. The adamantium of his combat knife lit and glowed like molten steel, but managed to push aside the lethal bar of light before it could pierce his body. The old man had traveled very far, and the strength in his arm was far greater than that of a normal human.
Yep.
Arachnus sought to strike at the man, but couldn't find a moment or opening to do so, wincing and backstepping as he contended with the dueling psyker's rapid pace. His knife was burning his hand even through his armor, and he pushed away and barely avoided strike after strike. Bright orange lines appearing across his armor as the near misses began to pile up.
Damn.
All the while, the man he fought kept a smug, imperious expression, his body moving like a wicker doll, precisely shifted and controlled on strings and strength born of the hellish warp. The front of the Astartes is...
Wicker doll? I mean, I get the entire thing, like, it's pulled on strings by the warp, which is how Jedi fight, it's how Sith fight, although Sith are more demanding and don't usually go along with it, so details there, but I don't get the wicker part. Is that just a phrase or a metaphor I'm not used to, but it's common in other places? Is that a phrase that was in the Imperium on the 40K side that I just haven't encountered before? I don't get that specific metaphor. I thought it almost sounds more like they're describing a puppet than a doll. And maybe that's what they're going for. But it almost feels like this is a phrase fan knows that he just put in there because it makes a lot of sense and would also be in 40K because that's based on Earth. So it probably stuck around in some weird form. I don't think I know that metaphor. It's never one I've actually heard before. Just unique. I don't usually run into that because a lot of metaphors I've at least heard of somewhere, somehow at this point. I read a lot of dumb shit and they just throw in metaphors all the time that don't make sense to me, so I look it up. At this point, there's been so many that I don't usually miss a lot unless they're very much outside of my experience. Huh. Interesting.
His boot came away, taking most of his foot with it. Then a portion of his forearm was seared off, and then a bright tongue of fiery pain licked across his thigh. Arachnus heard more than felt his combat knife fall out of his useless hand as the witch's red blade bit deeply into his wrist, using the loss to raise his free arm and bring it down in a murderous haymaker destined for the old man's head. But this too was stopped when the Psyker thrust his own free hand into the Space Marine's chest, pushing hard and throwing the warrior back against the wall, where his injuries forced him to slump down and collapse. He reached up and activated his Vox with his one good hand.
Beatus, Olantis, I am defeated. The enemy has me and will be upon you soon. He is a single Psyker with a power sword.
The Marine began to report. Save your breath. They are already dead. The old man said in flawless High Gothic, the result of a collar-mounted translator device, Arachnus would realize.
Okay, one, their translation devices went really damn fast. I wonder if that's because Dooku just had access to more powerful computers, or if Sidious threw over some of the details they already had to him. Honestly, for all I know, it could be both. Two, I mentioned that it was weird that Fan was showing the level a normal Space Marine was fighting at versus a Chapter Master, and it's usually in the reverse we see it. But then he's still doing it again. He's showing the comparison between a normal Space Marine and a Sith, because there's few, but they're way more powerful individually. And Force Lightning is bullshit against what they do, apparently. So we're not actually getting him as an example of Space Marines. We're getting him as an example of where Space Marines stand versus a Sith Master, or apprentice, technically. Even though he has his own apprentices, he's a master to other people. The bullshit of the rule of two and all that shit. Which is then, in turn, building up Palpatine's power level because he is still considered stronger than Dooku. I know his name's Darth Tyrannus, but I don't think I know anyone who actually calls him that. Yeah, it's weird now that I think about it. He's the only Sith I know of that never actually was going by his main Sith name. Weird. I mean, I guess Palpatine too, but that's just because that came in later and that was when he was hiding it. Details aside. Well, then I think about it, it's even because not everyone knew he was a Sith. Yeah, that's actually a thing in the Separatist movement. That wasn't actually well known to some people. I keep forgetting that detail. Mostly because I think it came out later.
More droids appeared then, the black kind, but not from outside the perimeter, as he would have expected, instead appearing from behind the position he had taken up beforehand, from where his fellow Marines should have been. He growled viciously, trying to rise, and failing as the old Psyker came to stand over him, staring down his nose at the defeated Astartes with only a mild disdain.
Mortals are coming. This planet will be ours.
Nope.
Arachnus spat, hatred grinding past every syllable he spoke. The old man merely raised a sarcastic eyebrow, and then laughed lightly and once. Then, without warning, he plunged his saber into the Marine's primary heart, holding it there, and using the warp to restrain Arachnus' remaining functional limb as he did. You lost this war before you started, fool. He said before twisting the red blade and tearing it out the side of Brother Arachnus' chest.
I was actually not expecting Dooku to be this competent. Just because I'm so used to him being the foil to, here's my brilliant plan. 5 minutes later, curses, it has been defeated, but I have also succeeded. But again, a lot of that was probably due to Sidious jerking him around to be just threatening enough for the overarching plan.
Cutting through his remaining second heart in the process. The Space Marine rasped one last hateful breath before the light faded from his eyes and he slumped down into eternal stillness. Damn. The Sith Lord deactivated his blade and sighed, wiping a sheen of sweat from his wrinkled forehead. That should be all of them, he said. We have located the charges they set. Should we begin disarming them?
Talking to?
Asked one of the nearby commando droids.
Okay.
No, you heard the savage. There will be more of them, and even if we protected this generator, I cannot protect them all, said Count Dooku. Roger, roger. What next? Asked the droid. Prepare the stealth ship. I'm evacuating the planet, he said, turning away from the large corpse he had created and walking towards the hangar. Very well. Shall I?
When he says evacuating the planet, I'm assuming he just means himself and leaving everyone else as a distraction, but do they have a giant bomb in there, kind of like they do on Axum?
Inform the rest of the Separatist Council.
Nope.
The droid asked, following at Dooku's right as the other commando droids began to salvage what they could from the dead
Is he just taking
Marine,
over officially now?
as they had done with
Getting
the
rid of the
others.
council?
And risk informing the Imperials of my intentions.
Yep, there it goes. The council's now gone, so he's basically sacrificing the planet to waste their resources on something he doesn't care about.
No, and besides, with the arrival of this new foe, I do believe that the council has now outlived its purpose. Assure them that the shields will hold, and that Grievous will come for them. Say no more than that. If they...
Yeah, when you say Grievous will come for you, I don't know if any way, shape, or form there ever any way... There specifically the council, and there's any way anyone sane could understand that as other than a threat. Grievous will come for you. Sounds like, yeah, Bagman, you, River, cement overshoes. You know what's going to happen. But I'm assuming since he's dealing with them, they're probably a bunch of incompetents who are just useful enough to do what he wanted, not actually people trying to help. Because some people were, but anyone dealing with him, he makes sure not to deal with that. Oh, wow.
They ask for me, inform them that I am valiantly defending their safety.
He even was for a
The
bit.
Sith Lord said. He then turned to the droid and paused. How is General Grievous progressing on his front?
Bad.
He asked. The droid paused
I'd
for a moment,
assume.
receiving information before responding. Not well. It appears that General Grievous will be unable to prevent the Imperial fleet from continuing its bombardment. Estimations dictate it will be anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes before the bombardment resumes, it said.
Oh.
Count Dooku considered that, and then shrugged, continuing on his way. A pity. Truly a pity.
Oh? What's going on here?
Suffer not the unclean to live. Lead us from...
Oh, are we seeing the planet break up? Oh, okay. They're probably totally an Exterminatus. I don't know what game this is from, but I'm assuming Battlefield Gothic.
Falsehood to truth. Lead us from despair to hope.
I don't know
From
what that is
faith
from.
To slaughter. Lead us to his strength.
I don't recognize this. It's probably from a game I haven't played, but it doesn't look like an Imperial design.
And
That does, though.
Of war. Let his wrath fill our hearts.
Oh, we're getting the Exterminatus. What was this game?
War and
Space Marine
blood.
1? I don't actually recognize it.
In
Or are they just
vengeance
exterminating the
serve
planet flat out?
the Emperor.
Is that freaking Superman versus Batman? No, I think this is the first Superman movie, Man of Steel. Yeah, I think that's his mom. That's the scene. Admittedly, this does look really cool. I knew I'd seen it somewhere, unless I'm completely off. I'm pretty sure that's what it was. Wow, I have not thought about that movie in literally years. Damn. Okay, holy hell, man. That was Fan flexing his muscles as an editor at the end, and he showed exactly what he needed to with all the different pieces of planetary destruction at a massive level, and I don't even know where some of those came from. I want to find out because they looked really cool. Some I did recognize, others I didn't, and just, damn. Dooku evacuating, saying, oh, 30 minutes, a pity. And then we don't get told what happens with the Imperial bombardment. We are shown what happens. Unless Fan retcons everything as like, oh yeah, and then back on the planet in the next episode, which I really doubt, then this is really a good way to show that, yeah, the Imperium is still doing the Imperium thing of, hey, here's a bunch of enemies. Fix that. Oh, it works, man. I love the brutality, but how it was so perfectly edited together. The music was really just beating you down, and it was like also hyping you up at the same time, and just so much brutality and destruction at massive levels, and usually kept to the same idea of either some kind of overwhelming destruction involving a lot of massive lasers and beams and small continent size bullets, which I feel I should know that one, but I cannot place it to save my life. I feel like I've seen it before. I just don't know why. That kind of bugs me, actually. Moving back to the parts the family was writing, though. Dooku's introduction. That was well done. I loved how he was using an established power level, but a little less than the Grandmaster, so there's still some surprise when that eventually comes to a conflict. I keep saying Grandmaster. No, the Chapter Master's level of power is down to someone who has to try against the droids, but can do it. Versus Dooku, who only broke a sweat against a single Marine. On the other hand, Dooku is shown to be incredibly powerful, but a single Marine made him sweat. But this is after taking out the rest of the Marines with him, which, admittedly, we don't know how many that encounter was consisting of. If it was maybe a troop, a platoon, if it was less than 100, maybe. I don't know. I don't quite know how many people were being alluded to. It could be very few for all I know. If it was 5 or less, I can see him not breaking a sweat even. If it was 5 and he did break a sweat, that's different. I don't know. But it did sound like it was a significant amount because they could call in reinforcements. And if it's a cruiser, there's probably a good bit of Marines there, even if it's in multiple places and there's multiple ships. I don't know. That said, it is clearly establishing Dooku as someone much stronger than a Marine who could easily take them out without any damage. So right now, I want more, man. I want to lead or find out what this is leading into. I want to find out what's going on with Grievous because he was mentioned and he's going to evacuate it, obviously, because Grievous does that just as much as Dooku does. And is this the entire Separatist Council, or is it the Separatist Council of the planet? I'm assuming it's the entire Separatist Council, and this is Dooku basically saying, yes, the pretense is gone. I'm in charge. Which, admittedly, he kind of was, but it just wasn't always as optional or blatant in some places, depending on where you were in the stories. Even I've heard that one. The most interesting line for me, not just the fact that they had fought AI intelligence before, was Dooku saying, due to changing circumstances, their usefulness is no longer needed. Because that means he's very aware of the situation, and he's, I guess you could say, changing the deal. How? I don't know. Is he taking direct command? I'm assuming, but maybe they'll surrender to the Star Wars side and then just become an empire to fight back against the other empire. That's a stupid idea, but honestly, maybe Palpatine will go for it. I don't know. I just want to find out what's going on, man. There's just so much and so many hints and drops and character levels and just... Fan is just taking this bit of a story right now and this Beyond Axum segment, pulling back from the rest and showing us, hey, here's the bigger picture and it's going to be insane. Oh, man. I want more. Just everything. I want more. Thankfully, there is more, so I'm going to go do that. Otherwise, you guys know the deal. Link below, video. Hit it up. I'll see you in the next one. Adios.